So for instance, this child is able to use a calculator, but the teacher wrote on the test, please use your calculator. And he said, I did use my calculator. And I said, well, maybe you were using it wrong, because I think there's probably calculation errors. I didn't see the math test, but that's going to be my assumption. So, you know, being able to then turn around and give that information to the tutor and have the tutor really kind of, the tutor being the one to say to the child, well, how can I help you? What are you struggling with? What are the difficulties? Sometimes we can't express what we don't know, which again is perfectly fine. But I think if the tutor is letting them know these are the areas that you're struggling with, then the child can turn around and tell the teacher and can tell other people, this is what I struggle with. I'm sure you guys probably all already have this, but if your child does have one-on-one support in school, it's really important that that one-on-one support has a fade plan to some level. It doesn't mean that the child doesn't, you know, like the next year isn't going to have an aide or something like that, that this all has to be done within 12 months, but that there's some level of the child being independent written into that one-on-one plan, so that the child realizes, hey, I can do some of this on my own, or we're giving the child the opportunity to do something there on their own. And I know for some parents it's been really difficult, because a lot of times children get to the point where they no longer do need one-on-one assistance. But in an IEP, the parents sometimes will say, well, you know, but I don't want to give it up, because what if when I take that aid away, the child's behavior becomes worse, or he's not able to keep up anymore academically, and then I'll never get it back. And that is a big concern, that when you let go of a service or you let go of a support, if the child needs it again, that you won't be able to get it back. And I don't know that there is a good precedent to say you won't be able to get it back if it really is needed. But oftentimes what we find is that when we do, you know, when the whole team decides that the child no longer needs the support, that oftentimes the child can really surprise you, because they really don't need the support anymore, and we can fade it out. But if you feel like I don't, you know, I'm not ready to let this go, figuring out, well, what is the fade plan? What are your expectations for the child to let it go? I was working with a child who had a one-on-one aide, and I really felt like he didn't need the one-on-one aid at the school anymore. The school felt that the parents didn't want to give it up for a variety of reasons. And at one point, a child on the playground came up to me and said, why are you always here? He doesn't have any problems. And I thought, this is the perfect time to fade away, because if his social circle says he's just like the rest of us, then it's now time, he's able to navigate, and he's actually been able to function okay without one-on-one support, and hasn't had any of the difficulties that he used to. But it took a while to get there, to that point where we all felt like, okay, we really do know that he will be okay without it. I think that if you're the one that's doing all the organizing and planning and everything for your child, try and figure out, how can I fade myself out? The same way as an IEP might have a fade out plan, we might need a fade out plan for mom and dad too. You know, at what point do you say, you know what, I'm not going to be the one to call your friends anymore. You can call your friends on the phone. Talking on the phone is really difficult. In my social skills groups, by the way, we have our kids making phone calls all the time, because it's really, really scary. And I get it, because I'm a person that doesn't like to talk on the phone if I don't know the person. I'm happy, I'll never stop talking with a friend, but I don't like having to call, let's say, the doctor's office or something like that. And I just don't like it. I always think the other person thinks that I'm an idiot, and I kind of have to practice what I'm going to say a couple of times before I call. And I'm always honest with all my clients too, and say, you know what, I don't really like it, but guess what, I have to, because nobody's going to do it for me anymore. And you know, my dad can't call for me anymore. I got to do it. And so, and you know, again, I have a lot of kids who are 12 years old, and I'll say, what are you going to do this weekend? And they say, well, I don't know, I think my mom has, you know, invited a friend over or something. And it's like, wow, do you want the friend to come over? Yeah, I'm really excited he's coming over. It's like, okay, how about next time you be the one to make the phone call, or you be the one to invite the child? So again, we're finding out, you know what, our kids can do all of this. We might need to say, why don't you give Johnny a call? That's fine, but we're not the ones that are continuing to make the phone call for the child and invite them and set up all of their play dates and stuff like that. And again, sometimes what that might mean is your child comes to you on a Saturday and says, I'm really bored. You didn't plan anything for me. And it's like, oh, I know, because you're 12, and I think you can plan some things yourself. What would you like to do today? Who would you like to hang out with? That's great. Here's his phone number. Give him a call. And you can do all of that kind of stuff. I'm sure all of you are familiar with visual charts. I'm not gonna really talk about them, except for that we have worked toward, with many kids, trying to get them to be the ones to kind of design their own visual charts. So not so much design it as in they're drawing it, but that they're the ones that are putting all the icons on. Here's the order of the way that you're going to do things today, or they're the ones who write it out each day. Here's how I want to organize my homework and everything. We do a lot of times really want to give kids the feeling of control over their own homework. So that is, you know, you've got 3 different things that you have to do for homework. Which do you want to do first? You know, kids have different ideas. All of us have different ways. Some kids like to start with the really hard stuff and then end with the easy stuff because it's kind of a reward. Other kids obviously want to put off doing the hard stuff for as long as possible. And I really encourage parents to let their kids make that decision, organize their homework themselves, and find out for themselves whether their methodology worked or not. That sometimes leaving the hardest stuff for the end means that it didn't get done. And then they can use that to help problem solve and say, okay, maybe I need to get the hard stuff out of the way, and then the easy stuff, it gets done much faster, so it's okay if I only have half an hour to do it or something like that. So they start to get a better sense of time. If a question that's come up with from a couple of parents for me a couple of times is, you know, when my child's done with their homework, I look it over, I help them, I make sure that they've got the right answers, and I'm correcting their homework for them. And the problem with that is that sometimes then the homework comes back and it's done perfectly and the teacher thinks, oh, the child knows all of this stuff, and then they give a test or something like that and the child doesn't know, and the child doesn't do well, and the teacher doesn't always know, oh, that's because he actually wasn't able to do this work independently. He got all the answers right. I had one family where they were constantly sort of like rewriting the child's reports for him, and then when it came time for the state testing on writing, he didn't do very well, and the school was kind of like, well, you know, maybe it was test anxiety, and it was actually, no, it was he actually hadn't been doing the homework himself, that the parents were doing it. And we all do our kids' projects. I mean, all of us have done the mission projects for our kids and all that kind of stuff, and I get it, but there comes a time for which we need to be able to say, you know, maybe you want to re-look at this one, maybe you want to try this one again, rather than telling them what the answer is and everything, and helping them, or maybe we let the teachers know, you know what, we corrected this, but here's what he was struggling with, or the child can go in and say, Mom helped me with my homework, but I really still don't understand how to regroup, whatever it is. I do think once kids are able to, all kids need to know their own goals. I'm still surprised at how many clients I have that I say, do you have an IEP? Yes. Great. What are your goals? No idea. What are your accommodations? I don't know. What's an accommodation? So kids should know, if they know they have an IEP, they should know what's on it. They don't have to be able to, I mean, I think that there's actually somewhere in the education code it says like children with IEP should know all of their goals. Well, some of our kids have 19 goals, and you know, you don't even know all of them, so we can't expect the child to have memorized their goals. But I think more like, you know what, I have a goal to improve my addition, I have a goal to understand what I read better, and I go to you know, Miss Smith to get extra help for that, and you know, I'm allowed to have my tests read to me and things like that, because when you do graduate and go to any type of college, you have to tell them what accommodations you need. And it is the child. Again, that's one of the areas where many colleges say we don't want the parents coming in and telling us what the child needs. The child has to say it themselves. So I think as early as possible, the children should know what their goals are and what their accommodations are. What are the things that you need? Another thing that is always important is that all kids kind of understand what the meaning of the word fair is, because again, like in the story that I read you in the beginning, where the young man said, you know what, I don't want to be known for my disability, I want to be known for my work, so I'm not going to ask for any of these accommodations. And unfortunately, like I said before, I have a lot of clients who have said that they've chosen not to give these letters to their professors because they want to do their work on their own. And I hate to say this, but a lot of those kids have not then been successful because they're not getting what they need. So oftentimes I'll explain to them what the definition of fair is. And the definition of fair is not that everybody gets the same thing. The definition of fair is everybody gets what they need. So oftentimes I will say to them, you know what you need to use a calculator? You're allowed to use a calculator. There's no reason to not do that. The same way as if you needed to wear glasses, you wouldn't say, well, I want to be just like everybody else and not wear your glasses and not be able to see. So you're willing to wear glasses. You were willing to do all of these other things. It's you need this, you need that. It's fair that you get it. It doesn't make you any less of a person, and it also doesn't make you your disability. That your work will still shine through. You just had to use a calculator to do it, or you needed extra time. So, I have a lot of clients who have always had extra time on assignments, and then they go to college and they say, well, I don't really know if I need it, and so I'm not going to ask for it. And I always say, but did you get your assignments done on time when you were in high school? No, because I had, and they'll always say, it was because I had extra time. I was like, but you knew when it was due and you still needed all of that extra time, and it might be a good idea to just continue to ask for it. You don't have to use it, just like you didn't have to use it in high school, but it's always good to have it. But that can be really difficult for some of our students to understand. Again, like I said before, really, how does your child envision their future? Can they envision their future? Do they have any sense of this is where I want to go? Because if they can't, then it is important that you kind of figure out where do I think my child can go, and that you help. You can't give your child their vision for the future, but some kids, like I said, they really don't have any vision for the future, and you need to try and figure out, well, again, what is going to motivate you and what are the things that you want to do. We start off with the concept of being able to be organized and being able to get ready. I just think it's so important that kids know how to get themselves, we're talking about high school kids now, that they know how to get themselves up, that they know how to get themselves dressed, that they potentially know how to make their own breakfast, that they know how to do all this kind of stuff. This is all really important because these are things that should they go to college or should they go and live outside of the home, they're going to need to do that. Cooking is a really difficult thing. Again, for a lot of parents, it's a safety issue. So it's kind of like, well, I know that he knows how to cook, but, with his ADD and stuff like that, he just forgets to turn the oven off and it's on all night or whatever, and these are all safety issues. And so if that's the case, then what are the supports that you might be able to put in place so the child would be able to cook for themselves? But, do you need something that says turn the oven off that's then posted on the oven? There's nothing wrong with that, because a lot of you might post things. I, again, happen to have a tendency to not turn out a closet light because the light switch is outside of the closet. So once I close the closet door, I kind of forget. And I, want to save electricity, be a good person and everything. So I had to put a little sign that said, remember to turn out the closet light, because otherwise I was just forgetting all the time. That's completely okay for me to do, so it's completely okay for your kids to do too, to say, remember to turn off the flame, remember to do all of this if that's what they need to do. Thinking about, again, I think I've kind of already said all of this except for the very last point here, which is that for some of our kids, they think asking for help is a sign of weakness. They really feel like, well, if I ask for help, then I'm saying I don't know, or I'm saying that I can't do this, and I don't want to do this. I don't want people to think that I can't do this. So then they just wind up not asking for help. And again, we really need to remind them that asking for help is a sign of intelligence. When you know that you need help and you can seek it, then you will be successful. But if you don't seek help, then things might not change. You might not learn how to do this. You might wind up not being successful in whatever endeavor you're doing. So you need to feel comfortable to ask for help. And how do you ask for help? That's really difficult. Hopefully the school is helping facilitate all that too, if the child still is at school. One of the things we know about helping kids develop resiliency is that when we praise effort over accuracy, kids are more likely and more willing to try challenging tasks. So that is, if we're able to say to our kids, you know what, you tried your best. It doesn't matter whether they got 50% or 100%. But if we always focus on, wow, you got 100%, you're a straight A student, you're a straight A student, the minute they get that first B, they are devastated. And that's not really what we want them to do, because we want them to feel really comfortable to try their best. There might be a time when a particular class is going to be difficult for them, and a B might really be the best that they can get at that moment. And there's no reason to be upset with that. We don't want the kids to be upset with that. So being able to say, you know what, you tried your best. You did all of the work. You worked really hard. I saw you studying every single night. I couldn't ask for anything more than that. Then the kids are more likely to try challenging tasks, and they're more likely to persevere when they think, this isn't as easy as I thought it was. If we focus on accuracy, they're less likely to try and to persevere on challenging tasks. Being able to do some early discussion of what is needed for them to go to college or to have a job. And again, when you ask kids, oftentimes, what are the job expectations? You'll get things like, well, you have to be on time and you have to do your job. It's like, well, okay, but what are some of the other things that you think are expected on a job? Or what do you think is going to be different in college than in high school? And of course, a lot of kids just don't have any sense of this. The same way as I think for a lot of us, we really forget how different high school is from college, because they're just so different, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of good role models on TV and stuff like that in terms of young people in college and everything. There's just most of the stuff that we see, unfortunately. Like if you look at most of the sort of teen-oriented shows where the kids are either in high school or college, they actually never go to school. They're actually never in class. There's a party every single night. This is not reality in any sense. And our kids watch this and they think, oh, school is really fun. Apparently, there is no school. It's the same way as a lot of these kids never have any parents either on these shows. So unfortunately, our kids they have no role models for this, because think about it. Think about a show where the kids actually are really going to college and really studying that isn't a comedy, and it's really hard to find where this kind of stuff is. So they're not getting a good sense of what this is. And in some ways, college is actually better than high school is for certain kids, but they're really not aware of that. And sometimes they don't do well just because of the fact that they're not as independent. But for those kids who are independent, because college is a lot more self-paced. Oh, am I done? No. My time's up. That's the way to kick me off. The fact is that, like, in college, you do get to kind of pace yourself a lot more, and it's not like you have to get things done every single day. It's rare that you have an assignment due in college every single day. So for those kids who are kind of like, well, I need 2 days to warm up to this concept and something like that, it's a little bit easier in college. Again, kids knowing their own strengths and weaknesses. So I ran over the summer a college prep group for a bunch of kids on the spectrum who were leaving and going to college. And one of the things that I said, okay, how do you guys learn? What type of a learner are you? And every single one of them said, I'm a visual learner. And it's like, okay, how do you know that? And it was kind of like, well, that's just what's been said to me. I'm a visual learner, I'm a visual learner. And then we did a couple of tests, and a lot of them found out that they're actually not visual learners. They actually learn much better through auditory channels, or they learn much better through tactile means. And this was really eye-opening to a lot of them, because they're like, oh, we just assumed that we were visual learners. And a lot of kids on the spectrum are visual learners, but just because you're on the spectrum doesn't mean you're a visual learner. So it's important for the students to know this is the type of learner that you are. Almost all of your kids have probably been assessed. They've had psychological testing, whether it's neuropsych testing, a psychoed, but they've had these types of evaluations. So you can sit down with your kids, because again, this is going to be expected if they do go to college, when they meet with the Disabled Student Services, that they're able to say, I am a visual learner, I have real difficulty listening and looking at the same time, I have difficulty taking notes and listening. I did have one student who was able, who when he met with the college offices, He was able to say that he has a really difficult time taking notes, but he can't bring a laptop because then he just gets too distracted by it. And it's just too difficult for him. And so he was given a note taker, which made complete sense. Now, when you get a note taker, mind you, in college, you have to be present in the class and you have to be listening. So you can't go to class and just play, you know, Candy Crush or whatever that game is called and have somebody take the notes for you. But the fact is he knew if I have a laptop in there, I'm going to wind up doing something else. I'm going to wind up, you know, writing a script or something, whatever it was that he wanted to do instead. And so he was able to actually tell the Disabled Student Services that that would be a problem for him and get the right accommodations for him. Prior to going to college, the things that can be put into place. Most kids need to be tested depending on when their last triennial was. A lot of colleges will say we want more recent testing. Also, colleges want actual IQ testing, and some school districts don't do IQ testing. So they may have given an IQ equivalent, but they don't actually do like the WAIS, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scales. So the school district will request that. And again, I think that that's really important. It's something that I do. I do that testing to help kids get into college and decide what accommodations they need, but I always make sure that the student is the one that gets the feedback. Obviously, moms and dads are more than welcome to be there, but I make sure that I'm giving the feedback directly to the student about this is what your scores were, this is how you learn, these are your areas of strength, these are the areas of weakness, and here's the accommodations that I think you should ask for, which ones are you comfortable asking for, which ones are the ones that you want. I think it's really helpful to do real life practice, do a lot of role play with your kids about going into the Disabled Student Services, what it's going to be like and everything so that they're prepared for it. Because again, there are some colleges where you won't even be able to go into the room with your child. They have to go in completely alone and talk to the people in the office by themselves. So we do a lot of role plays to get ready for this. And try and figure out what are the questions that are going to be asked, what are the questions that would be most intimidating for them. And for some kids, they're really good at explaining what they need, and for other kids, it's really hard for them. Again, they just feel intimidated by, I don't want to have to say that I need all of this. So we work on getting them to feel more comfortable, and sometimes we have to start this at about 10th grade because we might decide as a team that it's going to take that long to get the child to feel comfortable to talk about these kind of things or to really get them to understand what their own strengths and weaknesses are. Discussing with students what the differences between high school and college, and then also talking about what are the living arrangements going to be if your child is going to college. Will they continue to live at home? Will they live in the dorms? Will they have a roommate? A lot of colleges nowadays have single rooms, which a lot of kids on the spectrum choose to have instead of having a roommate because they may have never shared a room with anybody before, and it's pretty difficult. And so, you know, what are the different things? Or do they want to have communal living? What are the options that are there? Some parents are opting to rent an apartment close by and have a couple of older kids kind of live in, mentor their student as they start off in college. Some of the things that we want to keep in mind, the differences between high school and college. First of all, kids are used to being in high school and throughout their school career that their teachers just know everything about them and they know who they are. And half the time your professor has no idea what your name is, and they might not even want to know your name. They don't call you by name, they don't know anything, it's just you and you and you. So that's different. They don't know your background. Your teachers oftentimes do. They know your siblings, they've met your parents, they know whether you have pets, they know all of these different things about you. And then you get to college and the professors don't know anything about you, and they may or may not have interest in learning about this. A lot of times it depends on what the class is, the class size. And a huge difference for these kids is the difference in how much time is spent in class. Because you know, in college, classes might only be 3 hours. You get 3 hours of math a week. That's it. Where they're used to being in school 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, right? And that doesn't happen in college. Sometimes you have whole days off. Sometimes you have a class at 8 a.m. and then you don't have another class till 4 a.m. And what are you going to do in the meantime? And are you going to leave campus? Are you going to stay on campus? It's a very, very, very different. And that means there's a lot more time spent learning on your own. So the professor lectures, but you're supposed to take those notes and study them. You're supposed to read the textbook on your own. You're supposed to be able to kind of teach yourself this stuff. And some of our kids have never had that experience. They haven't really had to teach themselves things. They're used to the teacher standing up there and explaining everything to them, and that's not necessarily going to be an option in college anymore. Kids have a lot more leisure time, which isn't always the best thing for our kids, because it does mean that you can get completely lost in a video game. And I have lots of clients that have the best intentions, but they sit down and they get onto Facebook or they get onto YouTube, and next thing they know, it's 10 o'clock at night, and they really have not been aware of the time passage. And they've missed their classes. And it's like, oh no, what do I do? You miss one class, and it's very different than being absent for one day in school. You miss one class in college, and you could miss like an entire explanation, and the professor's never going to go back over it. Like, he had one shot to explain this concept or talk about this poem, and the next time you have that class, he's moved on, and now you've missed that entire class, which is something that, again, our kids aren't necessarily used to. Attendance isn't taken. It's all on the honor system, which they're not used to. The expectation is that you show up to class, but attendance isn't taken. No, there might be a section or something like that where they are taking attendance, but in most big college classes, they don't take attendance. You're responsible. If you miss the class, you have to figure out how to get the work. Usually your professor won't give it to you. You have to turn to a peer and ask the peer, can I borrow your notes, or something like that. You need to figure out, go if you have a tutor, which of course you can also have tutors at college. You would have to do all of that on your own. And then another thing that's a little bit different is that a C grade in college literally means average. That means that you are at the top of the bell curve. Most colleges grade very differently than high school, where in high school, if you do well, you get an A. If you've learned third grade material, you don't usually get a C, you usually get an A. But in college, if you've just done what you're supposed to do and you're not like at the top of the class, you don't get an A. And so that's been really difficult for a lot of my clients too, who are A students, go off to college, and they're doing well, so they get a C. And it's like, but why? To them that's like failing the class. And it's actually, well, that isn't actually failing. This is what it is. Colleges are done. It's like 90 to 100% is an A, and then and it doesn't matter. Maybe nobody got an A in the class. It's not necessarily graded on a curve. And so for some of our kids, they're not used to that type of grade either, and they have to get used to what all of that means and understanding how grades are different in college. In college, the student needs to seek out help when their grades are poor. So if they're not doing well, typically in high school, if the child isn't doing well, the teacher will usually either contact you or will say to the student, let's figure out what's difficult. A team will convene. People will talk about, well, these are the supports that you need. And that's not going to happen in college. In college, the expectation is if you didn't do well on a test, that you turn around and go to the professor and say, I'm not sure what I did wrong, or how can I get help, or something like that. So again, there's that high level of independence, and there's that expectation that the child will do the problem solving. The student will do the problem solving rather than the professor. There's way less homework, so there's less frequent feedback about whether you do or do not understand the concepts. And that's another thing that's really different. In high school, our kids are getting constant feedback. You are learning this, you are not learning this, you didn't understand the concept. I look at your homework every single night. Most of your kids, if you have high school kids, I'm assuming that your kids probably have homework every single night. And they don't. Oh, good. Every other? Okay, okay. So they have a different program there. But once you get into college, again, it's pretty rare actually that you sort of have homework. It's like your homework might just be study for the test. Okay, here's the notes, and I know you only find out at midterms whether you really did or did not learn the information, and that is really difficult. So we have to prepare our kids for this too. How are they going to know whether they're learning the material or not? Because they're not necessarily going to have any test to get that feedback from. As we talked about before, there's a lot of flexibility in scheduling. This is a positive thing. This means that if your child is not good at getting themselves out of bed early, it's highly possible to arrange your college schedule so you never have classes that start before 2 p.m. And you know what? Again, if your child knows I'm not an early bird, then make sure that they know when they're signing up for classes that they're looking for the latest classes they can find. Because signing up for a 7:30 a.m. class and thinking, I'll be able to do that, doesn't always work. Sometimes it does, but not always. So it's a positive thing that they actually get to schedule their classes. And oftentimes, especially for some of those core classes, they get to pick the times that the core classes are offered multiple times throughout the day. So then they get to pick what time would work best for them. We already talked about the fact, I'm sorry that every once in a while it kind of squeaks or something. Oftentimes the professors will not talk to you under any circumstances. They will not talk to you. I have had a situation. I was teaching classes at a university. This was back in New York, and I had a student who withdrew from my class. Fine, you withdraw from the class. It makes no difference to me. And the father called me up and he said, I want you to reinstate my child. You know, I didn't want him to withdraw from the class. And I had to say, he's 18. I can't reinstate him because you've said so. He needs to do it. He's an adult. He's the only one. Because remember, if your child's not conserved, they're the ones who are signing all the paperwork. And so if a child withdraws themselves from the class, a parent calling me can't change that. The child has to be the one, the student has to be the one that comes in and says to me, I want to be reinstated in the class. So the issue wasn't, can you be reinstated? It's that I can't do it because the parent says, once the child is over 18 and they're not conserved, the parent doesn't have any legal right to say, my child has to go to this college class. They no longer can do that. That was a family discussion that they needed to work out and figure out. And then finally, again, students can make any decision that they want once they're on campus without your permission. So again, they can decide to withdraw from a classroom if they want to, or from a class. And you won't have the opportunity, you know, you can call the college and you can try and say, I don't want my child to withdraw. But again, they have the right to make that decision since they are an adult and they get to make their own decisions that way. Yes?
If a child is conserved, though, and you mentioned that to a professor, would a professor really understand that concept and the legal obligations?
That's an excellent question, and obviously it would depend on the professor, but I would think probably not, and that you would probably need to fully explain what that means, even if it means giving them a legal document that says that your child is conserved, and therefore you are the one who legally signs the papers that your child can't legally make these decisions, even though he is over 18 or she is over 18. So absolutely, I would think that you would need to take that a step further. And obviously when your child is conserved, a lot of what I'm talking about is different because then you do get to make those decisions. Hopefully you're making them in conjunction with your child, but you do get to make those decisions. Just the final thing that I was going to say, just a few things about housing, is obviously if you haven't started the conversation with your kids about, you know, what are their desires? Do they want to live outside of the home? Do they want to live with roommates? Do they want to live on their own? What do they want to do? You want to start having that conversation, and you also want to start looking around at what your options are in your area for housing. Oftentimes, like I said before, kids don't know what it really takes to kind of live independently. What does it take to run a household and stuff like that? So I think that if your goal is that the child is going to be able to live independently or live with roommates, because just because they live with roommates doesn't mean that their house is going to be clean, their laundry is going to be done, or anything like that. So you still need to be able, working on all of those types of things. What are the skills like that you want your child to be able to have? And what are the ones that they're going to need to live in the environment that we all have decided is going to be the best for them? There's lots of there's a lot of support services out there through Regional Center to teach daily living skills if there are things that you still think that your child needs to work on. So if your child is a client of Regional Center, you can get those services. And then there's also programs like there's Advance LA through the help group and everything that actually comes into the home and helps teach daily living skills to students, whether they're about to go off to college, whether they're about to you know, we just kind of want to get them ready to move out of the house. So you do have some choices there of people that can come in. It's obviously, the more somebody can come into the house and teach the skills in the house, the better. I mean, you can have your child in a school where they might have a washing machine and a bed that they can make, but it's just not always the same thing as really learning it in the environment that you expect the child to do it. Unfortunately, as you guys probably know, those of you who have looked into housing, there's not a lot of options out there. And one of the things that's happening is a lot of parents are banding together, and they're the ones who are kind of saying, you know what, we're going to buy an apartment complex and we're going to turn this into like a supported living environment for children with special needs, children with autism, or they buy a house and several young adults get together and they all share that house with support staff. And these are the, you know, this is sort of how industrious a lot of parents are, as you guys all know, because there just are not a lot of options. And so there are still group homes, but oftentimes some group homes are kind of going the way of institutions, and they're just not as available as they used to be. And I do know several people actually who are in the process of looking at buying up some apartment complexes and turning them into almost like senior living homes, but it would be all designed for kids on the spectrum, that would include things like sensory gardens and stuff like that, so that kids could have the feeling of living alone, but there's still the support present. But this is all parent driven, unfortunately. It's not like there's good funding for that. Whether that's something that Regional Center would fund or not, I don't know. That might be a battle that has to be fought pretty soon if Regional Center doesn't fund that. There are, you know, independent living skills care facilities that can be involved in all of these that might check in with your child all day long or check in periodically. So I know one client that has ILS services who come in the morning to make sure that he was able, you know, to get up and get himself going, and then they come at night and make sure that, you know, he's taking care of all the things that he needed to do, that he paid his bills, that he did all of that, everything like that has happened. But otherwise the child is independent. He's not a child anymore. Otherwise the young man is independent during the day. And so the last thing that I'm going to say here is we do need to look at independence early on, as I said. The supports can vanish as your kids get older. Like when you think about putting your child in college or letting your child live independently and stuff like that, it might seem like the supports all vanish. But a lot of our kids can really thrive as long as we prepare them, and as long, again, as we do have some options available in our area for where our kids can go when they're ready to become independent. And also, you're not alone. You know, many people have gone before you. Many people, the autism community is one of the best communities in my opinion, in terms of being real advocates and everybody being out there trying to support each other, whether it's through Facebook pages or whether it's through parent support groups like this, and everything. So there are other, and my feeling is that the parents who have already gone through this are always your best resource for, you know, what worked for you, what were the agencies that were really helpful, were there colleges that were more understanding, all of that kind of stuff, because parents can be your best resource, the ones who have gone before you. I feel like you educating yourself on what's out there, what your child needs, and then turning around and educating your child on all of this. Even if it is to say to your kid, you know what, I know that you want to live independently, but you're not able to drive and you're not able to take the bus by yourself yet, and you're not able, you know, to pay bills, and you're not able to do your own laundry. So what are our options going to be here? Because there's not just a place that you can go to. There's not an apartment complex right now that you can move into where somebody's going to do that for you. And I think it's great that you want to live independently, but here's the things that we're going to have to get into place before you can do that. And of course, letting go is never easy, and it might be that we never fully let go, but we can loosen our grip just a little bit. And I know it's not easy, but we can do it. Yes?
Yes, you said Regional Center will not be supplying transportation when kids go to college.
Okay.
I wanted to know what are the options on that. And the second question I have is, when they finish college, supposed to finish college, and they apply for work, will the employer be able to know that they're in the spectrum?
Okay.
If they say no on that disability application, you know, do you have disability to perform job?
Okay. So to answer the
restate the question?
Okay, the first question was that Regional Center has said that they will not pay for transportation to college, but if your child has qualified for SSI, they should be available. They should be able to get access transportation, and I will leave it up to other parents to comment on access transportation. I've had some clients who haven't. The question was, after a child has graduated from college and they apply for a job, does the employer? Were you asking, do they have to know or will they know?
Well, in the application there is a question, do you have a disability that will affect your performance in the job?
Right.
Of course they will say no.
Right.
Will the employer find out that they're in the spectrum?
Okay. The only way that the employer is going to find out is if it's clear and they think they can make their own diagnosis, or they turn around and they say to the child, you know, I've noticed you do this and this and this, or do you have autism, which I think would be unusual that they would say that, and then your child would say yes or no. But a lot of kids say, because the question is specifically, do you have a disability that would, you know, impede you from doing this job or would affect some part of your job performance, that a lot of the kids in that case say no, because they feel like, well, my autism is not going to affect my ability, I can do this and this and this, therefore I do not have to disclose. And you don't have to disclose, though at times I feel like it is helpful. You know, I'm helping a client with that right now, where she doesn't want to disclose to her employer that she has Asperger's, but in my opinion, or she has autism spectrum disorder level 1, whatever, level 3, whichever one it is now. But she's already engaged in a few behaviors that my thought is, if they understood that you had autism, I think they would understand where this is coming from, and they might know how to react to you, whereas right now they might be interpreting what you're doing as being a little bit rude, and that's not at all where she's coming. That's not what she means at all. So I think it's catch-22 as to whether the child does or does not want to disclose, but they don't have to disclose.
And the employer won't know.
Well, there wouldn't be any way that they would know. It's not like they look up their social security number and up pops autism. No. So, and they don't get records from high school or anything like that on the job.
Departmental.
I don't know that they would request those. So, I mean, it would depend. You know, if he were applying for a job with the State Department, then yes, they do background checks, and that would come up. But let's say that he was just applying for a job at you know, JPL. I don't know. Well, maybe JPL would do, right? Maybe that was something good. He's applying for a job at Sony. Okay, so then they probably wouldn't do a background check like that. So no, it wouldn't come up. Yes?
Quick question. You mentioned earlier in regards to when a child is about to graduate and go into college. College requests current records. A lot of times there aren't current records because last evaluation was probably several years ago.
Yeah.
What other tests or exams do you recommend that students have before graduating to ensure parents are not in a predicament and the college representatives are asking for certain documentation to make sure that all the accommodations that they have are being provided? That's
a great question. There's really 3 things that I think are important. One is an IQ test. Right. Most colleges want the WAIS, the WAIS. The second thing is academic testing. So that would be looking at what's the level at which the child can read, write, spell, so that you have documentation that there's a learning disability there. And then the last thing would be an assessment of the child's adaptive skills. So for instance, if the child, that would be like the Vineland, if you're familiar with the Vineland. I think if you have those 3 things, that those 3 things put together can lead to accommodations, because sometimes some of the accommodations might be related to what the child needs in the dorms also. You know, like he's not able to do certain things on his own, so he's going to need some support in those areas also. So those 3 things would be able to help you put together, these are all the accommodations that my kid needs.
And this is something the school district will be able to provide, but some of them don't.
The school district can provide it. What it is some school districts don't give the specific IQ test. They all do the academic testing. They don't do the IQ test because of issues with the fact that IQ is being used to determine special education placement, and it's not allowed to be used. So therefore, all schools don't necessarily give that particular IQ test. But that's what the schools are that's what the colleges are looking for.
You mentioned you provide that. Do you have contact information?
I do. I can give it to you. I can give it to you. Yes. Yeah, we do. We can do that testing.
Does
yeah.
All all the colleges have this accommodations and modifications for our children?
They do not have any modifications. They only have accommodations.
All colleges?
Yes, all colleges have accommodations. It's kind of the equivalent of a 504 plan, like the Section 504 plan. So yes, they do. But the kids, again, have to request it, and they're responsible for letting each individual professor know what they need through a letter. The letter is written by the Disabled Student Services Office, but the child has to give the letter to the teachers.
Do they have IEPs in college too?
It's not an IEP, but it is something that documents what they need, and they need proof that the child needs a note taker or whatever. And then each year they go and they get a letter to give to their professors. They don't need to be retested every year.
There's no form. I mean, what is it called? I mean, the accommodations.
It's just that's exactly. It's just called the accommodations that the child needs, like a 504 plan. Yes.
I have a question.
I'm sorry.
I agree with what you say as far as the students knowing their goals in their IEP and accommodations. What if your child is like the little policeman that says, my IEP says, or my accommodation?
Yeah. Okay. I in a lot of ways, I think that that's a good thing. Even though it is a little policeman, I think to be successful in life, that what they need to do is find that one thing that they feel good. There is a way to do it. Sometimes it's extremely creative and it takes a while to figure it out. But if you have a good team behind you that can really help your child say, you know what, this is what I'm good at. This is what I want to spend all my time doing. You know, a lot of kids want to be video game testers because they're excellent, and this is a job that people on the spectrum are being hired to do, though, because they're really good at figuring out, you know, where the loopholes are and where the problems are, and they're able to say, hey, you know what, this was all green and then all of a sudden it turned purple and then it turned green. If your child really likes playing video games, you know, there's things where we can say, you know what, but this is a strength that can turn into a career, and let's figure out how to make that into a career and make them then feel better. Like, there is a way for them to succeed with that. Okay? Yes?
Did you want to mention anything about...
Oh, okay. Well, we do have... Sorry. I'm not always the best self-advocate. I will answer your question in 1 second, but I do have some handouts there about education spectrum as a whole, and then also our new Bridges program. Our new Bridges program is funded by Regional Center. It is a 2-year intensive college prep or gainful employment prep program. So Regional Center has agreed to fund it for 2 years. It's for high school students, mostly that you think are going to be able to go on to college, and it's at Education Spectrum, but at least we did get it Regional Center vendored, so so there's information about that there too. I know it took a lot. Yes, you had a question.
I know the presentation is about letting go, but you did allude or make a reference to a cultural situation where a family was not going to let go.
Right.
And so I'm just wondering about that. Are there other buckets or other areas that you think are under consideration for parents who decide not to let go, and what would be a good reason for that?
I don't even know that I would say that there has to be a good reason to not let go. If that is the family dynamic and how the family feels comfortable and the child is comfortable with that. Now, if the child is saying, but I want to go off on my own, then I would say something different. Then I would encourage the parents to let the child try and achieve some level of independence. But in the case that I was talking about, the child didn't have any motivation to be independent, and the family was perfectly happy to have him live at home and do all of this forever. So I didn't feel like I had any right to walk into that family and say, you need to stop this. This boy needs to go live on his own and everything. But I think that if a child was saying, you know what, I want to live on my own, I ultimately want to be able to live on my own, that I would then encourage the parents to figure out, okay, well, to what degree can you let go? To what degree would you feel comfortable? Would it be something where, you know, you build, I'm just going to, okay, you know, you build a second floor and it's an apartment that your child can live in, so at least they feel like, hey, I'm living on my own, my parents don't always have to check in on me, or something like that. Would it be something where you buy the house across the street and they live in it? What is it that the family would feel comfortable so the child can feel like, yeah, I am independent, if that's what they want?
Yeah, my son, for example, I know he can do well in a semi-independent situation, but when I talk to him about that, because he only knows the home,
Right.
he expresses that he would like to stay home.
Sure.
And then, you know, when I really push for a reason, you know, he breaks my heart. He says, "I'm going to take care of you and Mom."
Aww.
So,
Yeah.
you know, so I guess the question is, sometimes when kids are brought up in an environment, and that's the only environment that they're accustomed to, how are they going to ever articulate that need to be independent and go out? So that's the concern I have in terms of that dynamic.
Right, and sometimes that need only might materialize as they see other people doing it, and they say, "Oh, wait a minute, you know, everybody else used to live at home, and now all my friends or all my relatives, all my cousins, they don't live at home anymore. Maybe I shouldn't either." But you're absolutely right. For a lot of kids, it's like, this is the only thing that I know, and why would I want to go? But you know what? That's happening even with neurotypical children. And more neurotypical children are choosing to stay at home. Yeah, right, or coming back. Exactly. Yeah. So you know, again, I think that's understandable, and he might be 30 when he says, "Hey, you know what? I do want to take care of you, and I'll come back, you know, when you need me," kind of thing. But it might not be until he's 30. Did you have a?
Well, yeah, I think that when would it be appropriate to even talk to the child about the fact that, well, accidents happen, so parents could die immediately.
Yeah.
Plane crash or something like that, and they're left.
Yeah.
You know, and so there may be no option to stay home.
Right. That's an excellent question. I certainly think that if your child is at the age where they could live independently, so they're over 18, that might be a conversation that you want to have. Clearly, if they're under 18, even if something did happen to you, they wouldn't be on their own. I'm assuming that somebody would take custody of them. That whole concept, though, of talking about, you know, Mom and Dad aren't going to be around forever is a really difficult one, because a lot of kids just cannot possibly fathom, and again, because you have been their safety net for so long. It's like, what do you mean you're not going to be around forever? And it can be very, very, very anxiety provoking for them. So I would say that you might not want to have that conversation until you really feel like the child is ready to start to pursue some level of independence, or can handle that type of concept.
Just to piggyback on that, though, it's an interesting question. I think that my son, he understands transitions and death.
Right.
But that's because he's had pets.
Yes.
And he's also been to a funeral.
Okay.
We talk about never coming back.
Right.
So he understands the concept of that.
Right.
Because it's happened with animals and
yeah.
a neighbor who's passed away. So I think introducing that concept whenever there's an opportunity